right, I believe we should be broadcasting live and we're recording. Thank you everyone for joining us today for this Public Power in Nebraska virtual webinar. I just will share my screen quickly for some slides. My name is Lou Nelsen, and I will be your moderator today. I am a policy associate at the Center for Rural Affairs. I don't want to take too much time from our speakers. We have four wonderful speakers joining us today. They're all representatives of for different utilities here in the state. I would just want to go over some quick housekeeping. We are doing this town hall over Zoom. And also broadcasting it over Facebook Live. If you are a participant on this call, you will not be able to unmute yourself, but we will have time for question and answer at the end of the call. And I would ask you to send any questions you might have through the chat function that's in Zoom, or if you are joining us through Facebook Live, sending those comments over Facebook Live, and my coworker, Teresa Hoffman, will be passing them on to me onto the Zoom chat, and I will relay those to the directors at the end of the call. And I will just move on to introducing our speakers. Just going around the bend, first we have Dr. Lucas Sabalka of LES. He currently serves on the administrative board for Lincoln Electric System. He has a PhD in mathematics and an undergraduate degree in mathematics, computer science, and history. He's a former professor, and he is now chief scientist at a local medical technology company in Lincoln. He specializes in the transition to clean energy currently underway and focusing on the impacts in Nebraska. We also have Mary Harding, who is currently serving her third term as director on the board of NPPD. Mary has served as corporate secretary and chair of several committees, and is currently serving as the second vice chair of the executive committee and chair of the energy supply committee. She advises on federal energy policy as a delegate to the American Public Power Association's Policymaker Council. And she's previously served on the board of governors for Southeast Community College and was appointed executive director of the Nebraska Environmental Trust by both governors Ben Nelsen and Mike Johanns. And then on that lower row, we have Janece Mollhoff, who was elected to the OPPD Board of Directors in 2018, and she is a retired Army colonel and career nurse. Most recently, she served as Deputy Commander for Clinical Services with an Army hospital unit in Des Moines, and as a clinical manager for the Visiting Nurse Association in Omaha. Her previous appointments have been to the Ashland City Council, Ashland Area Economic Development Corporation Board, and Natural Resources Director for the League of Women Voters of Nebraska. And Janece has earned a bachelor's degree in nursing from UNMC and a master's of social work from University of Nebraska, Omaha. And then finally, we have Eric Williams, who was elected to the OPPD board in November 2018 and represents Subdivision 6 in Northeast Omaha. For the past decade, he has worked professionally and volunteered with community organizations toward conserving and protecting natural resources. He's the founder of the Omaha Biofuels Cooperative. He has installed solar panels on his own home in 2014. And I see here for the past 4 years, he's driven an electric car, which is very exciting. As somebody who personally aspires to drive an electric car himself. And I know that Eric says that he also continues his work in support of policies that help other people to reduce their consumption with renewable energy. I'm going to move on now to our speakers, but just another quick reminder, if you have any questions during these presentations, please feel free to use the Zoom chat if you are joining us via Zoom. And if you are joining us over Facebook Live, feel free to comment there and my coworker will pass those on to me and we will get to those questions at the end of the call. For the first section of this town hall, we are going to just sort of look at the more recent work that these utilities have been doing for the first half of the year during the COVID-19 pandemic, and just kind of generally what their priorities have been. And we will kick off first with Lucas Sabalka. And I will stop sharing my screen.
All right, can you hear me, Lou?
Yep.
Okay, great. So first of all, let me start by saying thank you for having me, and thanks to Lou for organizing and the Center for Rural Affairs staff for putting this on. I also want to give a shout out because as names have been coming across my screen here, I see that I have a number of other LES board members and some LES staff on the line. So I want to give a shout out to everyone that is with LES here. I figured to start with this section, first of all, I want to kind of keep my comments brief to give more time for Q&A and discussion. But I wanted to kind of talk about where LES sits in the kind of energy landscape of Nebraska. So there's my colleagues from MPPD and OPPD on the line here. They'll be talking, and then there's LES, and there's of course rurals and rural electric co-ops and municipalities and that kind of thing. LES is a municipal energy system, and so I just want to give kind of a little bit of a background about that, about our size and about what we do before I talk about what we've been doing in 2020. So we're part of the Southwest Power Pool, as is the entire state of Nebraska. The LES service territory is about 200 square miles, encompassing Lincoln and just a little bit of surrounding border there. We've got about 150,000 customers, 125,000 residential, and almost 150,000 customers, 17,000 commercial and industrial customers. We are governed by a 9-member mayoral appointed board. So all of our appointments were appointed by the mayor with city council approval during budget. So we're a little bit different than NPPD and OPPD, whose board members are elected. In 2019, we had revenues of 317 million. There's about 500 employees. We have about 1.7 billion in assets. We have a peak power of 786 megawatts in 2011. So kind of the way that I think about Nebraska is NPPD has the most generation, followed by OPPD, followed by LES. And that essentially translates to customers as well. LES is kind of like in third place for generation and customers in the state of Nebraska. We've got generation in 6 states. We've got about a third coal, a third renewable, and a third oil and gas. When you look at the actual usage, usually gas is much lower. Coal is about half, renewables are about 40%. As with NPPD and OPPD, LES is known for very, very low rates. So that's one thing that we have, we're very proud of at LES and in the state of Nebraska. Okay, so that's kind of a background about LES. Let me also, I do need to give one disclaimer, which I think every person on the call is going to give, which is that I'm on the LES board, and all of these were just facts about LES, but the opinions that I'm going to be talking about today, where I do express an opinion, those are my own. They do not represent the board. They don't represent LES. They are my perceptions of being on the board for LES. So just a disclaimer that what I'm talking about is kind of my own view of what's happening in the state and what's happening at LES. Okay, so what's been going on in the first part of the year? I think that there's kind of a few main topics that I want to hit on. And so what I'll do is I'll mention just a few comments about each of these topics, and then if they come back up again in the Q&A, we can go back into them. So in the first half of 2020, we began talking about decarbonization, carbon goals, energy goals, and energy generation goals. But that was interrupted very quickly by the COVID pandemic. So let me come back to talking about decarbonization in the second half of the presentation today, and just say that in the first half, we had some initial discussions, but those got put on hold. We're now re-engaging them. What else we've been focusing on at LES? Well, obviously, for the last few months, our attention has been, especially for staff, has been dominated by the pandemic. There have been, it was essentially all day, every day for a long time for staff trying to figure out how to respond to the pandemic and both keep our employees safe, but also keep the lights on, right? I mean, electricity generation is a vital piece of our economy, of our lives now. It's necessary. We have to have the power on for hospitals, for government, for homes, for businesses. So keeping that running, but while staying safe, was a big priority. There were a variety of arrangements made for working for different employees. Many employees, if they could, they worked from home. There are various areas set up to handle, to try and keep people from coming into contact with one another. Masks and personal protective equipment and sanitizing gel and those kinds of things are all part of the response. We halted disconnects in the middle of the pandemic for customers that were unable to pay their bills due to losing their job or temporarily losing their job from the pandemic. Overall, from in April and May, I believe, we saw generation at LES down about 10%, 10 to 15%. I think in Q2 overall, it's down almost 10%. But interestingly, demand is back up to historical levels now. I don't know, I guess, up to date as of this week. As of a couple of weeks ago, we were back at historical levels. So we think that might be, at least first wave impacts might be over. That was kind of the big focus for part of the year. Two other focuses that I'll mention that LES has been working towards have been building a new operations center. LES is building a new center on the south side of town that has been a multi-year project. It's been a long time coming, and it's actually almost done. So staff has been moving over to the operations center and operating from there this year. The rest of the center will be completed and open. I think the board is going to be moving there in the first half of next year. And then the other thing that I'll mention is we've been looking at a number of different opportunities and programs to try to investigate the energy transition that is underway in this country, it's underway in the state, and it's underway at LES. One of the things that just recently came out is an electric vehicle study. And there was some good information that just came out on that in the last month. Staff would do a much better job of giving a presentation on that, but actually the staff member who would be giving this talk just joined. But the EV study was very interesting in terms of seeing the impact of electrical vehicles on demand, when that demand comes for customers in Lincoln, how people are charging in Lincoln. Turns out they're mostly charging at home. What kinds of vehicles are being driven, how long they're being driven, whether people are driving, if people are driving plug-in hybrids versus electric vehicles, what that split looks like in terms of energy consumption, in terms of habits. So that was a really interesting study. There was some good stuff. LES just had its Sustainable Energy Week, Sustainable Energy Festival Week for the first time digitally, and we put together a number of presentations. I think that those are going to be online soon, so I'll point people to those presentations to see more about what LES is doing on sustainability, as well as that EV study that I was talking about. Okay, those are kind of the main points that I wanted to hit. I'll turn it back over to you, Lou.
Thanks, Lucas. And next we will hear from Mary Harding. And I have some slides from Mary that I will try and get on your screen right now.
Good job, Lou.
All right.
Okay, thank you. As Lucas also said, I'm really happy to be here, and I appreciate the Center for Rural Affairs putting this together. The facts that I'm presenting in my slides are all available at nppd.com, so if we run through things too fast for you, you can go and find them here. But as far as opinions go, those are all my own. I'm not speaking on behalf of the corporation or the board, just my own personal opinions. So speaking of the board, we're governed by an 11-member board. We're each elected for 6-year terms. They rotate. This year there will be 4 of us who are up for election, subdivisions 1, 2, 7, and 9. I know this map might be a little hard to see, but I wanted to share it for one reason, and that is that all of the colored areas are areas where NPPD serves. And the white areas are areas where we do not have wholesale or retail customers. So you can see that it's a large area that NPPD serves, and very diverse as well as large. You could go ahead to the next slide, Lou. So here are some of the facts about NPPD. Lucas mentioned some of the differences between LES, OPPD, and NPPD. One of the major differences for us from OPPD is that we serve both wholesale and retail customers. OPPD is a vertically integrated utility by and large. We are in our retail communities where we have approximately 92,000 customers in about 80 communities. But the other percentage of our business is wholesale through partnerships with other utilities, both rural public power districts, one co-op, and a number of municipalities. We have miles and miles and miles of transmission and distribution lines, as you can see. 600,000 end-use customers, both at wholesale and retail, in 86 of 93 counties. I wanted to give you a couple of facts that aren't included here. In general, 2019, retail accounted for about 16% of our sales. Wholesale accounted for roughly 43%, and the rest is off-system or non-firm sales agreements. Lucas mentioned that we're part of the Southwest Power Pool, and through that, we sell our excess generation into the market. That's been something that management has handled very, very well, in my opinion, and has enabled us to keep rates down. I'll talk more about that coming up. In 2019, we had 20 million megawatt hours sold in total and revenues of about $1.1 billion. We do see demand going down, but that's not all that different from national trends where growth is either very slow or flat. This year, of course, will be interesting because everyone's use has changed. People are working from home. A number of industries has suspended manufacturing or processing for a period of time. So the way things look at the end of this year is still a bit in question, but we know it won't look like our recent past years. In general, our generation mix looks like this. Coal is from 48 to 52% of our generation mix over the last 4 to 5 years. Nuclear ranges from 28% to 36%. One reason that varies so much is we have a 2-year refueling cycle. So every other year, the nuclear plant at Brownville, Cooper Nuclear Station, comes offline for a period of time for refueling. And that accounts for the variability there. Then the remaining 20% is hydro, wind, gas, oil purchases, and solar. Would you like to go on to the next slide? I just wanted to list the retail and wholesale communities that we serve very quickly. I don't have a lot to say, but I wanted you to see the great diversity again of relationships we have and how it's kind of a unique challenge for us because we want to meet the needs of every community and consumer that we serve. But things are different in Gordon than they are in North Platte, than they are in Norfolk, In my district, I have Murray, Minard, and Nehaka, which are all very small communities. Their needs are somewhat different from, say, Chadron or Scottsbluff. Next slide, please. And here are our wholesale power partners, 24 rural public power districts, well, 23 and one co-op, Niobrara Valley, and then the wholesale communities where these towns operate their own distribution service. They do their own billing. We deliver energy in bulk. Next slide, please. So I wanted to talk about our recent achievements and save discussion about our projects that are more forward-looking for the second half of the discussion. Some things that we're very proud of are that we have not had a rate increase in the last 7 years for our retail customers, nor in the last 3 years for wholesale partner utilities. In addition to that, we've been able to offer bill credits over the last 3 years to all customers, which returns unanticipated revenue back to the customer. When I mentioned earlier that about 30% of our sales are off system, I think this is one of the things that management has really excelled at, making that happen in a way that's very beneficial financially for our native load Nebraska customers. So we were able to actually see more income than we had budgeted for, and that went back to the ratepayer. Another achievement that we're very proud of is that we've been recognized as an RP3 utility by the American Public Power Association. That means that we have been recognized as practicing the highest level of safe and reliable delivery of electricity. There are about 5% of the utilities that are members of APPA that have received this designation. We were also recognized as a Nebraska Safest Company with distinction by the Nebraska Safety Council. And we also have achieved highest ranking for safe operation at Cooper Nuclear. If you remember, many years ago, the operation at Cooper Nuclear Station was a bit in question. And it's been a very deliberate and concentrated effort over a number of years to get us where we are. We never say we're done reaching the level of excellence we want at Cooper, but I think the ranking we've achieved is something to be very proud of in terms of both efficiency and safety. I think, you know, the upshot of these achievements shows you that really we are focused on delivering nuts and bolts in the utility world and doing that with excellence. It's what our customers tell us they want. The wholesale rural customers are organized to be with us every month at our monthly meetings and let us know their views on this. They want low cost, reliable, safe power. But we've also heard from our residential customers in our reputation research, and was just presented to the board last month, that again, and all the, I want to find the factors here. Out of a number of factors, service delivery, safety, and cost were highest performance of concern to our residential customers. Leadership and vision, ethics, innovation, the environment, community involvement, significantly lower. So I think as far as it comes to the core operations of a utility, we're doing very, very well, and I'm proud of the focus that management has brought to this. I think it also leaves us some opportunities for focusing on the future and ways that we can modernize our system, and as Lucas said, join in the transition of power generation to a cleaner future. And I want to talk about that when we come to the second section.
All right, thank you, Mary. And last up, we have Janece.
Thanks, Lou, and thanks to the Center for hosting. I'm really happy to be here tonight. Any opinions that I express are my own, but I'll start off by saying that Omaha Public Power District is not just Omaha. We have 13 counties. I represent subdivision 7, which is Saunders, Dodge, Washington, and Western Douglas County. So I have mostly about half of the rural area of the district. And so we have 1,797 employees, 5,000 square miles of service area, 380,000 customers, and 855,000 people served. So we are customer-wise and account-wise only next to NPPD in size. All of our generation is in Nebraska, and so we don't have to, and though we do participate in the SPP in the market for power. So I just wanted to start by saying that our mission is to have reliable, affordable, and environmentally sensitive utility. And I'll highlight that by saying that when my husband went to the cardiologist, we told the doctor that he asked us how we got there. And so we said, well, he was referred by a friend who'd come to see him and was happy with the service. And so he said, well, that's good to hear. And my husband says, well, yeah, the ones that survive, you know, thought you gave good service. So as long as we survive, as long as we meet our mission, which is reliable, affordable, and environmentally sensitive, if we keep the power on, if folks can afford to pay their bills, and if they like clean air and water, they'll probably think that we're doing a good job. So in the first part of this year, we've worked really hard to keep our employees safe because we are an essential service, and our COVID response has been foremost in that. So I'll just go through those 3 areas that I talked about: the reliable, affordable, environmentally sensitive. And as far as being reliable, in the past 3 years, we've replaced 300 miles of underground cable, and we've done aerial inspection of 1,280 miles of transmission lines. Included in that is pole replacement. So over 1,200 poles we've replaced in the metro area and 719 in the rural area, along with vegetation management. Really helps us to keep the power on and to make sure that our services are reliable. We're working on some overhead to underground conversion in the rural areas. One of the things I heard over and over again in the rural areas is they felt like they were being somewhat neglected, and that, you know, the city of Omaha got all the upgrades, but that's, I think, starting to change. We're working on smart distribution technology, and especially in the rural areas, so that we can identify outage locations faster and get that power back on faster. So the number one thing with OPPD is just to keep the lights on, to keep the power on, and keep our economy running. The second thing is affordable. COVID has put strains on a lot of folks' finances, both rural and urban. And so early in the pandemic, OPPD stopped shutoffs and late payment fees. And we're working with the Douglas County and with the state to get additional funding to help customers with assistance with their electric bills if they have impacts from the COVID virus. So one of the things that happened was we got an increase in the LIHEAP funds, which will help people pay their air conditioning and heating bills. We got $2 million from the CARES Act from Douglas County. And then we've increased fundraising for our energy assistance program, which is administered through Dollar General and through the social service agencies in the 13 county area, not just in Omaha. So that's something that really has changed and has streamlined the process for people applying for assistance and getting help, because we know that if your energy burden is too high and you have to struggle between paying your energy bill and paying for food or medicine, it can be a real struggle. So the other thing with affordability is that we have had a no general rate increase for 5 years, and that has helped us to stabilize folks' bills in the district. So the third leg of this stool is the environmental sensitivity, and OPPD has at the end of 2019, the community solar and the Shoals wind came online. And so we are at about 40% renewable generation for our retail customers. We're also in the middle of the LED streetlight conversion. We have 100,000 lights that had to be replaced in both cities, county, and state roads. And so this LED streetlight conversion equates to savings for all of those governmental entities that pay to keep the streetlights on. Also, we've increased some funding or maintained funding for our demand management program, which not only does it help OPPD with our peak demand, but it helps people to manage their bills. And so a couple of the programs that we have for that is the Nest Thermostat that we can adjust during times of peak load, the Cool Smart and HVAC curtailment, and something that I was able to actually participate in recently when my air conditioning went out when it was 100 degrees was a rebate for high efficiency heating and cooling systems, so that if you go to the next level of efficiency for your heating and cooling system, OPPD will give you a rebate on that system. So that's really what I wanted to talk about, is how OPPD is working to keep our services reliable and affordable and environmentally sensitive, and to serve all of our customers in a way that helps them to manage their lives. That's all I have.
Thank you, Janece. Well, now that we've gone through our 3 utilities and talked kind of generally about recent work as well as current priorities, I thought now we could go through and look to future priorities, what's coming in the near future. And just a quick reminder before we go back through, if you have any questions, feel free to pass them on through either the Zoom chat or the comments on the Facebook Live. And we'll start again with Lucas.
All right. Okay. So I think I'll do the same thing with this section that I did in the last section, which is kind of hit a few highlights, and then if people want to hear anything more, we can talk about it in the Q&A section, and I'll try and keep them short so we have more time for Q&A. So as LES looks to the future, or as you know, through my perspective, this is kind of what I see as some of the priorities and opportunities with LES as we move forward. Obviously, the pandemic is going to continue to be a bit of an issue. It's going to continue to affect business operations and day-to-day operations. So that'll continue to have some attention. Hopefully, though, you know, for the good of LES, for the good of the country and the world, that's going to be a shorter term effect. As we go, as I look at other priorities that the board has talked about, that staff are looking at for LES, these are some of the things that I see. So one thing that I'm kind of proud of is with the recent protests and discussion, the national dialogue, one of the things that the board has started engaging in with staff, and staff has been doing both with itself and with the board, is looking at equality and inclusion. And so those are ongoing discussions So I'm looking forward to see what comes out of those. One recent study that LES did to look at resilience in the face of emergencies is to think about implementation of a microgrid in downtown Lincoln, essentially to create an island in the middle of the LES network that could be powered in and of itself if the rest of the Southwest Power Pool, Southwest Power Pool goes from Louisiana up into Canada. If the rest of the power pool, or if LES was disconnected from that power pool, we'd still be able to operate some power in the middle of downtown Lincoln with a number of important facilities therein. So that's a nice thing that the staff is looking at implementing later this fall. We've got a potential big data center customer. Project Agate has been in the news in Lincoln. We don't know what that load is going to be, but it could be small load, it could be big load. So we'll see if that has an effect on LES's footprint. There's the recently announced electric vehicle incentive. LES has partnered, I think it's with the state of Nebraska, to offer incentives for electric vehicle purchase. So that's kind of fun to see that transition. Not only do you have the transition underway in the electricity sector away from fossil fuel generation toward cleaner sources of generation, you also have this transition underway in the automobile sector away from combustion engines and towards electric motors. That EV incentive program kind of dovetails in with that EV study that I mentioned in the last part of my remarks. There's also the Sustainable Energy Program. So that's LES's version of incentives for sustainable behavior and trying to incent our customers to make sustainable choices. The Sustainable Energy Program has been around for I think more than a decade. It's got it's had some really positive impact on our load. It's had some positive impact on our customers. And one future portion of that program that I'm personally excited about is a partnership with the Community Action Program here in Lincoln. It's essentially an energy assistance program for low-income customers. I'm excited to see the future of that project. Also, a big chunk of the Sustainable Energy Program future, I think, is going to be in the LES Peak Rewards program. So this is where LES pays customers to allow LES to adjust the thermostat just a little bit, just a few times a year, exactly when LES needs to adjust it in order to try and limit the amount of power that we're serving, the amount of load that we're serving, try and shift it earlier in the day, essentially. And that's been pretty successful so far, and I think that that's going to continue to see success. And then finally, I'll mention the decarbonization discussions that the board is doing. So decarbonization is a source of discussion throughout the industry. This is definitely something that many utilities are looking at, including LES. We had a number of meetings and discussions and talks in committees and in the board early in the year about decarbonization. And then, of course, COVID-19 hit. The March meeting was canceled. The April meeting was a very brief and COVID-focused meeting. And most of May and June was playing catch up for talking about COVID-19. So we've just started getting back to that discussion now. But we're planning on having discussions at the board level for the next couple of months, 2 or 3 months, about various aspects of what could a goal for LES look like, what are other utilities doing in the area, what is feasible in terms of time scale, what is what's optimistic, what's realistic, what's pessimistic, and then the mayor of the city of Lincoln is talking about releasing a plan for sustainability, and so the goal is to hold a vote shortly after the mayor described her plan on what decarbonization future looks like for LES. I guess the last thing that I want to mention is that, and I think that this is true for all the boards here, I just described some of the opportunities that I see for the future for planning for LAS, but we always love hearing from customers. If you are a customer of LAS, please feel free to engage the board. I believe the email address is board@las.org. There's also the website where you can submit comments, las.org. So, or actually, I think it's .com. I apologize. But please engage with the board, give us your comments, and we'd love to incorporate those in our discussions. Okay.
Thank you, Lucas. And next up, we have Mary.
Thanks, Lou. Are you going to put some more slides up for me so I can remember?
Yep, sharing my screen right now.
Yeah, all right, that's awesome. So in terms of future opportunities, characterizing this as future opportunities is a little bit inaccurate because there are a number of things we've been doing for a long time. System modernization is something we look at as much with our retail customers, maybe predominantly over wholesale customers, but there are numerous things such as converting street lights to LEDs. We're just wrapping up a 3-year program to convert all of our retail meters to AMIs so that there's two-way communication to make repair and troubleshooting faster and to reduce costs. And eventually, I think, offer some time of use rates as a possibility down the road. We have community solar programs in our retail communities, currently in Kearney, Scottsbluff, and Venango. And I think there are half a dozen communities lined up that would like to see this happen. I know Plattsmouth is interested, although 2 years ago we had a flood that took out our water system. So it was kind of a matter of first things first. But there are a number of things like that that we continually look at and try to stay up to date in providing for our customers. Electrification is a real opportunity for the future. This year, I suggested we add a budget line for this, and it was adopted. So we have a budget line to look at how we can electrify transportation around the state. And there are other things eventually that could be considered, such as heating and cooling assets in buildings. There are a number of reasons why this is important. One is it can lower costs for the end user. It lowers our carbon footprint overall, which is going to become more important over time. And also, just from a utility standpoint, it builds our business and increases load for our utility partners. I'm going to skip down to Skunk Works. I want to make a caveat here on Skunk Works because I have the highest regard for the individuals who work in this area for us and the quality of things they brought to us. But you know, Skunk Works is kind of the innovative, atypical opportunities that you go out and turn over rocks to look to find. And we've had a very active group of people and active endeavor in this area. For maybe the last 10 years, we looked at compressed air storage. We seriously evaluated buying an old underground gas cave, if you will, and using that to put air in at a high pressure so that we could kind of normalize wind and other variable resources, make them more available on demand. Likewise, we looked at pump hydro and seeing if we could create a lake that we could pump water up when there's excess energy and run it down through a hydro plant when we need the energy. We worked with manufacturer of large, like 10 megawatt diesel engines to see if we could adapt those to be powered by renewable fuels such as methanol. We've been very active with the Department of Energy on carbon capture demonstration projects and other things like that. Monolith, carbon black manufacturer in Lancaster County has been in the news lately. but we worked with them for a number of years to explore the feasibility of using hydrogen instead of natural gas to fuel Sheldon Station south of Lincoln. It was just recently announced that Monolith has found better options for them going forward. That doesn't end our partnership with them. And if I understand correctly, they're still interested in 100% renewable power. So we'll be working to meet the needs of that customer moving forward. Hopping back up to Plan B, I think the most significant thing that we've been doing to really dig deep to look at what our options are for the future is a process we dubbed Plan B, to look at decarbonization. We began in June of last year meeting with a committee of wholesale and retail customers, as well as members of the boards and staff. We brought in a number of utility experts from around the nation to talk about the business risks associated with carbon moving forward, as well as some of the opportunities. That Plan B process wrapped up in January of this year, and has led us into now having contracts with 2 different consultants to look at what the implications of decarbonization would be for NPPD and our generation assets, our fossil fuel generators. We want to look at reliability, we want to look at cost, we want to look at risks associated with carbon. And we expect those consultants' reports to be back in December or around the end of the year. When those come back, then we have, in my opinion, the opportunity to really roll up our sleeves and dig down deep to look at what our plan is for moving NPPD forward into the future. We do have an integrated resource plan due in roughly the same time frame over the next year or 2, so the 2 things will mesh very neatly, I think. Couple other quick things. We've been very involved in trying to promote rural broadband and working with private companies to help support them. The availability of broadband throughout our service territory would be a great boost, both in terms of the quality of education and economic development and business opportunities. And like LES, we have not started, but we have slated to do more work on diversity and inclusion in our workforce, as well as benefits to our employees, because, you know, the workforce is changing and we need to keep pace. How about the next slide, Lou? I wanted to point out that our meetings are live streamed. If you go to this page, nppd.com about us/live streaming, you can find when the next meetings are scheduled. You can find links to watch our meetings on the internet. I think this is something I fought for quite a while. And I think it's very important, especially considering the great vast distance we serve. It's tough to come to Columbus for a lot of people, and this made us a lot more accessible, I think. There are also archives there where the recordings of the meetings are available if you want to go back and look at what we've done in the past. There's one other website mentioned here at the bottom. It's about us/board of directors. Every director has their email and their phone number and their home address listed there. So if you want to express an opinion or ask a question, you can find us there. And certainly we encourage, we want to hear from the people we serve, so use that resource. Lou, I want to thank you again for putting this together. I'm looking forward to the questions that may come up from the audience.
Thank you, Mary. And finally, Eric Williams.
Yep, good evening, everyone. I'm focused on the future part of the OPPD presentation, so thanks to Janece for talking about some of the active work we've had in the recent past and currently ongoing. Thanks to Lou for hosting this and the other board members and staff members for joining to have this conversation about public power. Similar to everyone else, any opinions I express are my own, not for the board or the utility in general. I think we should make sure and highlight something that we probably all are aware of, but Nebraska is the only all public power state. And it's really great to see that all three of the large public utilities in Nebraska are here to talk about the benefit of public power and how, by working to represent our customer owners, we are really improving the quality of lives for people across the state of Nebraska. Nebraska is unique in several ways, including the unicameral, which is unique in another way this year. Our legislature meeting right now under challenging circumstances. Nebraska also unique in the natural resources district system, which is close to my heart because that's where I work during the day. But then Nebraska unique in the all public power system. We are the only state that has all public power. So we are all the way on one end of that spectrum, from public all the way to private. And I think that as the other couple of utilities have highlighted, one of the main benefits there is that without a profit motivation, public power has delivered low cost, reliable, and increasingly environmentally sensitive energy for people in the state for many years. Probably about 80 years, kind of depends how you count as to when the utilities started or when the former version of public power was around. But from here forward, I'm really focused on policies at OPPD that can help us continue to be that leader and community champion in providing electric service and recognizing what the future of the utility, the electric utility industry will be as we go through this clean energy transition. And so there's a couple things I wanted to highlight. I'm going to do a little bit different version of a presentation. I've got several things pulled up on my computer right here, and I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And so I hope you can all see that now. And if you're still with us right now, you're probably interested in the graphic we're looking at. This is the Southwest Power Pool website, spp.org. And in particular, if you click on the price contour map, if you are still in this presentation right now, after about 45 minutes, I think you'll find this map very interesting. We have all talked about what the SPP is. This is a visual representation of the SPP. It's live up to about the 5-minute increment. You can turn on the transmission lines and see where the power is coming from, where the power is going, and the color of the map reflects the price of power at that very second. So again, in the electric markets, you have to balance the amount of power production to the amount of power demand. And this is a great way to view that and kind of get an idea for a lot of the things that we've talked about and how the complex problem of managing a utility while we transition from some of the generation assets of the past to generation assets of the future, how complex that can be. And this visual is just endlessly interesting to me. So spp.org if you're interested to see a little bit more of that. I'm going to continue skipping through some other visuals here because we've got challenges with COVID where we can't be together in person, but that means that we can look at things digitally, and we've got live updating presentation materials available. So this is the oppd.com website. I think we are all aware that our website is in need of some ongoing updates. So I'm going to refer to some places on the website that if you are looking for some information, you can find it. And primarily, if you go to the About tab and scroll down to Leadership, sometimes it jumps around. So you get over and get to the Schedule and Minutes page. I think this is the place where you're going to find a lot of the presentation material on the topics that we're going to talk about as the future direction of OPPD. So if you scroll down, it works backward chronologically. Older meeting materials are lower down the page, but you can see all of the resolutions. You can see all of the informational presentations about what OPPD is up to. And this is a great resource that, again, as public power, we need to be open and transparent and engage with our customer owners. And so this is all of the material that we talk about at the board meetings. There's also a link for the committee meeting minutes and agendas and materials. And so there's a great amount of past information if you want to see where any of those discussions have happened. One of the past presentations that is has already been given, and this is, as it says, from June. Britton Gable presented about our income qualified program. And this is really important because this is the version of the program that is out now, and some information about ways that we are helping OPPD customers in challenging times. And I refer to this now as we talk about the future because Douglas County has made available some resources to OPPD and MUD through the CARES Act funding. And I believe next Tuesday, there will be an agreement on the Douglas County Commission agenda that will authorize the use of those funds. And so stay tuned for some update about where our low income qualified program has been and how additional funds will be available through the Energy Assistance Program to help people related to the ongoing public health crisis that we're all trying to work our way through. So this is a great presentation about a lot of the information that the Energy Assistance Program usually operates under and how those resources are provided. But in the future, there will be additional information about increased availability of assistance. Additionally, as we look to the future, again, this is an update that we at a board meeting, but in preparing for the future, the customer-owned generation process was recently streamlined. And so this website was updated about a month ago, talking about what's called net metering, which is if you generate your own energy and you have excess when you're not using it, you can sell it back to the grid. Again, I'm pretty sure that most people on this call are familiar with this, but as you scroll through the customer-owned generation website on page on OPPD's website, there's some new information down here, and the staff spent quite a bit of time preparing some new tools, a quick start guide, and streamlining the application process for anybody who wants to generate their own energy and be a part personally of that clean energy transition. Janece and I both are strong supporters of solar as well as electric vehicles, and I think we encourage others to join us in generating clean energy and then replacing fossil fuels with electricity, clean generated electricity in your personal life, as well as participating with utilities as we do that at a larger scale. Just a second, the presentation moves around just a little bit here. Okay, next up, as we look to the future, this is the residential rates page, and I'll provide a set of links to all of these resources to Lou, and we can hopefully share those out with anybody who is interested. But the residential rates were also recently updated in preparation for the future. And as you scroll down, there's some newly updated information that gives background about the residential rate structure. And that's important because recently in the Finance Committee and at the broader board meeting, we've talked about how we can continue to recognize that mission of affordable, reliable, and environmentally sensitive energy. And in focusing on affordability, realize that that doesn't just necessarily mean the lowest price per kilowatt hour on your bill, but knowing that affordability relative to income, relative to geography, relative to a whole bunch of different metrics can vary by individual, by part of the community, by the rural customers that we serve relative to the urban customers. And so over the next year and a half, we'll be talking about our residential rate structure, targeting removing the declining block in the residential rate structure, which is reflected on the right side there in the blue bars, where the amount that you pay per kilowatt hour decreases during the non-summer months. And that is somewhat of an older residential rate structure. And so we are looking to update that rate structure in the future. So there will be a lot of future discussion over the next 18 months about how OPPD is focused on recognizing affordability and delivering new rate structures prepared for the energy utility of the future, rather than rate structures that have been used in the past. Again, I got to move this around a little bit. I'm not sure if it's jumping on your screen, but there we go. As we look to the future, this is a link to a recent study, and I think this is probably no surprise to a lot of people, but 2/3 of Americans think government should do more on climate. And I mention that because, again, as an all public power state, we are government agencies sanctioned by Nebraska state statute to deliver electricity to the customer owners in our jurisdiction. And so as government agencies, we should be listening when we hear surveys that say you should take more action on climate. And this is a reflection of a growing trend in the American people in general over the last several years and even decades to be more and more focused and more clear about wanting to see action on climate, specifically with reducing carbon emissions. This has been talked about by both of the other utilities already. And I think OPPD's action over the last couple of years have been great steps and lined us up well for the future. So in following on an increasing demand from our customer owners to be more climate sensitive and to take more action, the document you see here is our board policy binder. Probably the most technical thing that I'm going to show. This is a PDF link to the board policy binder. You can find it from the management page on OPPD's website. But as you scroll down, this gives a good breakdown of all of the information that's in this document, specifically the strategic directives, the board staff linkage, and the governance process. And those highlight the relationship between the publicly elected board of directors and the senior management team and all of the employees at OPPD. In general, board members work on what we want to see from our electric utility, and the management and the staff work on how that is going to be delivered. And so the most frequently referenced set of policies here would be the strategic directives. So as you scroll through the policy document, this is a list of all of our strategic directives, and these are the key accountability policies and metrics that the board members review 1 or 2 each month and then update as necessary to make sure that our utility is pointed in the right direction in the future. Related to action on climate, SD7 is environmental stewardship, and the document is linked, so you can click directly on that one. You can see the dates when it was recently, most recently updated, including November of 2019. And as you scroll down, the reason I pulled this one up, again, focusing on environmental stewardship, we officially have a goal of having net zero carbon production across not only our generation fleet, but the entire operation at our utility by 2050. And this was a pretty big change. If you look back up at the recent updates, there was an update in November of 2018 that first recognized the need to take action on carbon emissions. And then in November of 2019, there was another update with a more specific goal saying net zero carbon by 2050. That's setting the specific outcome, net zero carbon, and the specific timeline, 2050. So that's what we want to see. And now the management and the staff will work to come up with how we're going to get there. I might have outsmarted myself on some of these tools. All right. This is a new engagement tool that OPPD has just made available. It's called Community Connect. So the website is oppdcommunityconnect.com. And I reference this because one of the 3 major actions from that it started last year was the update to Strategic Directive 7 and setting a net zero carbon goal. The other 2 major actions last year in terms of policy for the future was the approval of Power with Purpose, which you can see on the left side of the screen. And that is a very comprehensive set of new resource planning and acquisition, 400 to 600 megawatts of utility scale solar and 400 to 600 megawatts of modernized gas to replace some of the older assets, including removing the coal from North Omaha Station burners 1, 2, and 3, burners 4 and 5, and taking burners 1, 2, and 3 offline entirely. So there will not be coal at North Omaha anymore. That will be replaced by these new assets, and these new assets will also meet the increase in demand we've seen over the last couple of years. So Strategic Directive 7, net zero carbon, Power with Purpose, a very large investment in modernized and more clean generation. And then the third major policy discussion has been pathways to decarbonization on the right here. And if you click on these, there are engagement opportunities here to read information about what the policy discussion is. And as you scroll down, there's even some engagement tools down here. And this is different from the last time I was at the website. You can see even recently there have been some new suggestions for how OPPD can work towards some of that decarbonization activity. So within the last year, Net Zero Carbon 2050, Strategic Directive 7, Power with Purpose for very large acquisition of clean resources, and then Pathways to Decarbonization, the study which will identify how we're going to achieve that future outcome of getting to net zero carbon. Oops, hang on one second here. And I think I might have stopped my screen. Let's see. Hold on one second. Like I said, I'm trying something relatively new here. Back from the board meeting minutes page, I would also refer you to this presentation, which is the next step of policy discussion from OPPD. It's called Strategic Vision 2050. This is the Power with Purpose and the Decarbonization Initiative are focused on the relatively short-term steps necessary to begin that process of removing carbon from our generation and our operations with that long-term goal in mind. Strategic Vision 2050 is a little bit longer view of what does the utility look like fundamentally by 2050, and what What large-scale changes are we expecting? How should we be prepared for those? How can we embrace those? And how can we help to bring those things forward to be leaders in that clean energy transition that we're all expecting? So I would strongly encourage you, if you're interested in the future of OPPD, to look at this presentation on Strategic Vision 2050. It hasn't had a lot of public discussion yet, but there will be more in the future. There's a good breakdown of how different parts of the planning process on SD7, Power with Purpose, Decarbonization Study, and Strategic Vision 2050 all work together. And then the last page of this presentation talks about a timeline where we are in the Strategic Vision 2050 process. So these are kind of the major policy discussions that are going on at OPPD right now, or have gone on within about the last year. OPPD once annually does a board retreat physically out of the office. It's going to be a little different this year because we've been physically out of the office for several months. But the idea of the retreat is that it's not an official board meeting. It is open to the public, and it's a discussion of prioritizing what policy work we'd like to see in the next 12 months. So all of these things will come up in that meeting. That's going to be happening August 25th and 26th. There'll be more information about that, but stay tuned for to hear a little bit more about how the board members and the senior management are going to be working together at that workshop to talk about what types of policy updates, just like we've reviewed here, what additional types of policy updates should we expect in the future. And again, taking it all the way back to the beginning, we mentioned that this was public power. And so if you want to engage with your board members or your senior management team at OPPD, this page was just updated in an effort to make it a little easier, a little more streamlined to get in touch with any of the board members, which you can see on the left, any of the senior management team, which you can see on the right. And then as you fill out this form with the topic you'd like to discuss in your message, it triggers an email to the board members. And there is strong accountability for senior management and the staff to respond and let the board know how we are engaging when people have specific questions. And so if you use this form, if you go to the leadership page on OPPD's website and use the contact form, you will get an answer, maybe from a board member directly to confirm that we've heard from you. Generally, the board member who represents that area is the first one to respond if it's appropriate. Otherwise, the senior management team would delegate to staff to follow up. And so if you have any questions or comments or want to engage at a time other than the public board meetings themselves, you can use the contact form, and we are definitely listening and we want to hear from you so that we can continue to be the clean energy leader in our community in the service territory that we serve. So I hope there are some questions and ongoing discussion about where OPPD has been, where we're going in the future, and how we can work with the other public utilities in Nebraska to bring about that clean energy transition. Thanks very much for being here, everybody.
All right, thank you, Eric. And thank you, Janece, Lucas, and Mary. We will start to look at some questions. We have a handful of questions in the chat that I'll run through. If you have any, though, please feel free to continue to share. I know that we have a few minutes for questions, so we'll jump right in. So the first question is actually, why aren't NPPD, OPPD, and LES building more nuclear energy? And I don't know who would like to start with that one, but I will toss it out to the group.
I could start. Around the country, new nuclear projects have not been tremendously successful. And they all tend to be vastly over budget. And so, you know, the expense tends to argue against going down that path. I know a number of years ago, Mid-American Energy started down the path and then backed out and said, nope, this is going to be too expensive. The regulatory path to having a new site licensed is daunting. And so I think cost and regulation are two reasons why it's not a hot topic in a lot of utilities these days.
I'll echo what Mary said. I think that's absolutely right. It's prohibitively expensive, at least compared. There's a lot of other cheaper options out there. I also want to mention that, you know, for something like LES and even OPPD, maybe NPPD, really to make that kind of investment anywhere close to reasonable, you have to have a very large investment. I mean, you're talking about a plant that's probably larger than the footprint of LES in order to justify that expense. So just the fact that you really have to go big or go home on nuclear makes it a very, very large bet, and recent very large bets have not been panning out for those utilities, as Mary said.
I guess I would add there is also under development the concept of a small nuclear reactor, modular nuclear reactors, but those have not those haven't become utility practice yet. They're still under development. So I think it's something we don't really want to jump the gun on.
I would just say that, you know, a number of years in 2015, OPPD made a really difficult decision to close our nuclear power plant. And I guess what I can say is the director that was on the board before I was, who actually lives up in that area, basically described it as hemorrhaging money as they were trying to make the nuclear power affordable, because it was the smallest. And as Mary said, you have to have scale. And it was really the smallest nuclear power plant in the country. And the scale was not, it wasn't just not economic to continue. Now, those modular nuclear plants that Mary talked about, they use the spent fuel, from what I understand. And so we have the spent fuel up at Fort Calhoun that we'll be storing for the next unforeseeable future. So if and when those modular nuclear units become cost effective, so that we can get there and keep our rates low, because that's really of high importance to OPPD.
All right, the next question is for Lucas, and it's if LES was involved in the StarTrans decision to buy electric transit buses.
Sorry, I'm struggling to push the unmute button here. No, not to my knowledge. I mean, I believe that LES has been talking to the city of Lincoln. Staff talks to the city of Lincoln all the time about energy needs. And I believe there were discussions around how to provide the energy for those buses. Because if you think about it, an electric vehicle can actually cause a noticeable spike in energy use. If you think about that on a bus scale, and then you don't think about it just on a bus scale, but you think about it on a bus depot scale. So you're talking about multiple buses charging at once. There are really some technical hurdles to overcome there. So I know LES was talking to the city about that, but my understanding was the decision to go to electric buses was entirely the city.
And since I'm not sure if we're going to get another question about electric transportation, I'm going to just jump in here real quick. I am very, again, personal opinion, very strongly supportive of electrified transportation. And Lucas makes a good point that with high-speed chargers, there can be very high demand on the grid, and that is extremely expensive. So from an individual perspective, you mostly encounter your primary cost as you encounter the utility is from the consumption, meaning how many kilowatt hours you are consuming. But from a utility perspective, the expensive part is being able to meet the peak demand. And so large power draws, like the type of power necessary to charge an electric bus, can be very expensive to have that capacity available and the transformer and the distribution equipment to make that happen. The same is true on individual electric vehicles. I think it's important that we view electric vehicles as a completely fundamentally different technology than the way we've viewed combustion vehicles in the past. A lot of people refer to them as internal combustion vehicles or ICE vehicles, and the ICE age is ending, and we need to be prepared for something new and different in the future. Combustion vehicles, you fill them up very, very quickly. You go somewhere and pay someone else to fill them up very, very quickly. But an electric vehicle, ironically, the best analogy I've heard is a little bit more like a horse. You can ride it all day, and when you're done, you just put it out, and it goes out and it eats for a while slowly, and then it's full of fuel the next day when you need to ride again. And that's how an electric vehicle can work. You don't need to charge an electric vehicle in 5 minutes in order for it to have the energy necessary to meet your daily transportation needs. That's very, very infrequent. Some people do that, and we'll get to those use cases eventually. But in the interim, a vast majority of all people on almost all trips can use a level 2 charger, which is just the same as an electric dryer, and that energy can be provided through the circuit breaker panel and the distribution equipment at your own home right now. And I did not get a chance to watch LES's presentation last week during the Sustainable Festival about their EV study or about their electric buses, but I will be going back because, again, very passionate about this, and the view of what this means in the future, particularly as battery capacity increases, is going to be dramatically different. I personally hope that OPPD works with Omaha Metro, the transit authority here, and we come up with some kind of solution that we can have electrified transit, electrified individual transportation, and even electrified micro-mobility options in our community in the near future.
I'll just echo that people should go and watch that electric vehicle presentation. I found it fascinating. I watched that issue closely myself. I'm an EV owner. And I certainly learned things in that presentation, from the EV study that LES has done, especially especially when thinking about how electric vehicles impact Nebraska, impact Lincoln, impact the Midwest. The weather issues, the distance issues. We're not California. We're not going to use our electric vehicles like a Californian would. So I recommend going and look at that when it comes out.
Just to kind of stay in the same vein, I know that we have a question from the chat, actually from Facebook, and it's from a recent Chevy Bolt owner who has a question about what each utility's plans are to create a more robust network of fast charging stations throughout the state. Eric, I know you already touched on this topic a little bit, but I didn't know if Lucas, if you have any more to share from LES's perspective, or Mary, if you have anything to share from NPPD's perspective, or if there's anything else from OPPD's perspective.
For LES, I'll just mention that there was a number of recent charging, I think it was something like 14 charging stations that were grant funded that will be going in the next year or two. But I think that most of those were actually not LES. Again, that was a lot of business and city working with LES, but I don't know that many of them were sponsored directly by LES. In terms of statewide infrastructure, that's more of a Mary question than a me question.
Yeah, and with statewide, the distances involved in our service territory can be significant. Excuse me, and the vehicle use tends to be somewhat different too. There are a lot of trucks out there, and there's a lot of, agricultural transportation that we don't really feel the industry's quite there yet. I think when we see, I know they're under development, but when we start to see Ford and other manufacturers come out with pickup trucks and other kinds of vehicles that have the same utility to an agricultural producer that they can get now, then we're going to see our service territory wanting more in the way of infrastructure to serve them and their vehicles. We do have a project underway to look at how we can begin to roll out infrastructure, mainly along major corridors, to make that available for people traveling across the state, either east and west or north and south. And we do have a number of incentives for individuals to purchase electric vehicles and put in charging stations in their own home. We're looking at encouraging builders to look at doing this as a standard operating procedure going forward. But I think we are going to see this unfold a little bit slower in our area than Omaha, for example, or Lincoln even.
And the next question in the chat, I guess I should check Janece or Eric. I don't know if either of you have anything else you want to add on EV charging infrastructure.
Just that OPPD get did apply for and receive a grant from through the NET, I believe. And so we will be putting charging stations in the outlying areas around Omaha, as well as in Omaha. I believe Blair and North Bend and Nebraska City and some of the other towns around the metro area, outside the suburbs a little bit. There will be some charging stations, but again, they're in those transportation corridors where you know, the distance isn't prohibitive to people who are going about their daily business.
And as Mary mentioned, and Janece represents a more rural district than I do, but in the urban area, particularly if you are in a 2-car household, having one electric vehicle and one non-electric vehicle is such an easy step forward. We did that here in my house. It's been great. I would encourage people to keep that in mind. And from an economic perspective, a combustion vehicle uses about 30% of the energy for forward motion. About 30% of the energy is heat out of the radiator, and 30% of the energy is heat out of the tailpipe. Well, a third each. In an electric vehicle, about 90% of the energy is used for forward motion. It's about 3 times as efficient in converting energy to the end outcome of motion. And so when you compare the cost per mile equivalent of an electric vehicle to a combustion vehicle, the energy needed per mile is dramatically lower. But the benefit to electric utilities is that if you have a charger at home, a residential customer pays the highest rates of any of the highest per kilowatt hour rates of any of the customers at a utility. And so it can simultaneously be quite a bit cheaper per mile for the driver and extremely beneficial to the utility from selling off-peak power as electric vehicles charge on timers at night in garages all over the service territory. And there are a few hundred electric vehicles in the area right now. I don't have a real accurate count, but there could easily be 10 times as many in every 2 years for the rest of the decade before we get to having as many as are going to become a problem to the utilities. And so we really need to be encouraging people to look at this as an option that helps them save money, helps to clean the air, and also generates new revenue as utilities look to future business models and where we're going to balance that new clean generation with dispatchable demand like electric vehicle charging.
And let me toss in one more statistic here, just because I'm reminded of the electric vehicle study from LAS in terms of EV fast charging stations. In LAS service territory, that electric vehicle study looked at about 90 customers and their uses, and it found that over, I believe it was 85% of charging for an electric vehicle happens at that person's house. So most charging is going to occur at home and not elsewhere in the city or the state. You know, there is a little bit, you know, for long commuting, there is a purpose for that, but most charging is going to be occurring in the home.
All right, and for our next question, this question is about with forecasts for wind and solar and storage continuing to drop and becoming cheaper than coal and gas and even nuclear options, have any of the utilities started to study the possibility of shutting down or transitioning away from coal units by 2030?
You want me to go first?
If you'd like, Mary.
2030 is not on our drawing board. We have discussed 2040 as a date for decarbonization goals, and the consultants we've hired currently are looking at 2050 as an end date. You know, we thought for a while that we were really going to have a great opportunity at Sheldon Station south of Lincoln to decarbonize and have the first in the nation utility scale hydrogen generator. That hasn't happened, and you know, due to the economics of it, but I think we're still committed, at least I am still committed to looking at what we can do with that site that will reduce our carbon footprint. We do remain very mindful of cost, and are seeing a number of bids coming in for renewable projects, seeing those costs go down. They're still not at par with our major generation costs. And so it's just not competitive yet. And that creates a little bit of an issue. Also, the fact that we're long on generation right now makes it hard to squeeze in more generation to our portfolio. So those are my thoughts about NPPD.
So as far as OPPD, 2050 is our goal right now for net zero. But certainly the decarbonization study that will come out next year sometime will chart a roadmap, and we'll have a better understanding of those benchmarks along the way where we could transition some of our other carbon emitting generation to either battery storage or solar, and we already have, you know, like I said, 40%, almost 40% with our wind. So, the other thing is, you know, by the end of 2023, with the transition of the North Omaha coal plants, I mean, we do have plans for some transition of our carbon-based generation, so some of our fossil fuel plants. So OPPD is working kind of in a very methodical way to transition to net zero carbon, but not by 2030. 2050 is our goal right now. But personally, you know, I'm hoping for a ramping up and not just a status quo and then a quick drop off. And the board has talked about this many times, so that we want to see a very methodical process in decreasing our carbon footprint.
And in terms of LES, so, you know, just to echo what I said earlier, you know, we're in the process of having that discussion of exactly what decarbonization would look like for LES, what the year is and what the goal is, whether it's, you know, zero carbon or net zero carbon or what have you. I think that one thing that's true about 2030, and probably true for a lot of utilities, is that if we were going to hit 100% reduction by 2030, we probably needed to have started already. I mean, it's going to be a major transition for many utilities, including LES. 2030 is going to be a heavy lift. You know, Vice President Biden just announced that about 2 weeks ago that he's making it a federal, you know, a target to get to 100%. I think it's net zero by 2035. So, you know, maybe there's going to be some federal policy guiding or driving LES's discussion, the utility discussion in general. We're certainly having that discussion, whether it's, you know, 2035, 2030, 2040, or 2045, 2050, you know, anywhere in that, I think is under discussion. I do want to mention that, you know, all of the utilities have made good progress with decarbonization over the last decade, including LES. I think the stat is that LES has reduced carbon emissions by 42% over the last 10 years, which is fantastic. And one other thing that I want to say about that is, you know, LES has been doing that without a decarbonization goal, and I am, you know, very, you know, proud of staff in their efforts and in their progress. I think that many of the utilities here, especially given how obvious it is the national environment is decarbonizing, is towards decarbonization and less carbon, that utilities will be moving quickly and oftentimes faster than stated goals to decarbonization. So what exactly LES's stated goal is, I can't tell you. We don't know yet, but don't be surprised if we get there faster.
All right, and I know that we're at the 8 o'clock mark, but if the directors will be willing to stay around, there's one more question that just came in, and this is on what about looking to the benefits of incentivizing customer-owned or leased renewable energy or storage for peak reduction and non-wires alternatives, and what are each of the utilities potentially doing to incentivize either of those options?
Sorry, Luke, can you repeat the question for me?
Sure. So the question is, what about looking at the benefits of incentivizing customer-owned or leased renewable energy and storage for peak reduction and non-wires alternatives?
I guess I'm not sure what non-wires alternatives means, but in terms of the peak reduction, one of the programs that's part of the Sustainable Energy Program for LES is a solar panel reimbursement mechanism. So there's both a net metering component, you get paid if you produce more energy than you consume, as well as a component that reimburses explicitly for capacity. So if that solar panel is positioned in a way that helps LES meet its capacity on those hottest days of the year, on the summer peak months that we tend to have here in Nebraska, then people get a one-time credit for that. To my knowledge, that program is continuing. And I'll just mention that the peak rewards program that I talked about earlier is directed exactly at shaving that peak. So I think that there's a lot of options in terms of targeting that peak and using and incentivizing good resources. I think that all the utilities are exploring those. LES is exploring that. I look forward to the future. I think that there's some good ideas out there that haven't been implemented yet that will be.
I expect that with the, oh, sorry, Mary.
No, go ahead.
I expect with the decarbonization study, there will be some allowances for distributed energy generation, because in all of the presentations we've had, the pictures of the grid of the future shows distributed energy and how that integrates with our grid. So I expect that in the future, OPPD will, as a part of our decarbonization plan, as part of our net zero goal, because we can't do it by ourselves, we have to have the community engaged in it. So I really expect that the distributed energy will be a part of that decarbonization plan. I can't say that for certain because I'm not making the plan, but we'll, I know there are members of the board who are encouraging in that direction. So go ahead, Mary.
Thank you. Yeah, good answer. And that was a very sophisticated question. For us at NPPD, it's a little more complicated. And there will be two paths forward, because in areas that are served by wholesale partners, they will control how this works in their service territory. It's not something that we as the wholesale generator of electricity can determine. So the answer to this question for us tends to focus on what are we doing in our retail communities. And yeah, I don't want to say the same answer over and over again. We're looking into it, we're studying it, but truly you've caught us at a point where we are doing some very deep dives into studying how we're going to make these transitions. There are a lot of benefits to distributed power in terms of resiliency. And as the weather continues to give us flooding and high winds and a number of other things, there's some benefits there that aren't directly monetized, but certainly impact reliability of the system. So I anticipate we will be looking at those things as we do our studies. But again, the area that we control in this regard is somewhat limited as a wholesale provider to most of the state that we serve. I do want to say, in my own personal opinion, you know, I think time is our enemy. We've seen for decades the studies discussing the impact of carbon in the atmosphere. And I know there's still a variety of opinions and a lot of divergence of opinion about how important this is and what difference it makes to us here in Nebraska. But, you know, I've got a long line of people here in Nebraska who preceded me, homesteaders and otherwise, who really sacrificed so that now, decades, centuries later, I get to live a very good lifestyle. And I've got the next couple of generations following on behind me who are here, and I hope they stay here in Nebraska. I think it's a great place to live. But I think part of our job as board members is to not only keep our eye on the dashboard in front of us that says how much gas we've got in the tank and how fast we're going and when do we need our next oil change, but also to look at the horizon and see what are the challenges coming up ahead that we're going to have to cope with. So my personal hope is that we will answer these questions sooner rather than later, and we'll begin to take action in a more expeditious fashion. Time will tell.
So kudos to whoever asked that questions, echoing Lucas. A question about non-wires alternatives. Well done, Lou. You'll have to tell us who that was so I can follow up with them later, because they sound like they're pretty well informed. In general, the major hurdle for renewable generation, wind and solar, primarily in Nebraska, is the intermittency. From a utility perspective, the old adage would be that you project your demand, you know what your demand will be, you try and project what the demand will be in the future, and then you dispatch the resources necessary. But in the future, it will be the reverse, where you try and project the amount of intermittent generation you will have and dispatch demand to meet it, meaning that you will have things that you can turn on and off, thermostats, electric vehicle charging, electric boilers, domestic hot water systems, that you can manage the amount of consumption based on the intermittent generation of solar and wind energy, coupled with a little bit of storage and balanced across a grid with hopefully new transmission across the Southwest Power Pool and connected to other RTOs as well. So that's a fundamental shift in the way that electric utilities will work in the future. And I think that we are just beginning to conceive of what that will mean. And another common expression is that we always over project the change in the next 2 years, but under project the change in the next 10 years. And so while 2 years from now, we might not be infinitely far down the path of decarbonization, I would guess that in 10 years, by the time we get to 2030, looking at that net zero 2050 goal that the IPCC and others tell us is necessary to avoid the worst consequences of climate change, I would guess that we'll see some of those end lines moving in a little closer, because they'll become more practical, the technology will have advanced, and we'll be more able to use things like distributed generation, non-wires alternatives. All of those technologies will have advanced to the point where we can implement more of them and still provide the high level of reliability and affordability that we've seen in the past. So I think that it's going to be a very interesting time to be involved with electric utilities in the future. I've been at OPPD for about 18 months. They are 6-year terms. So I'm very glad to be here over the next several years, and very glad to be working toward that long-term outcome that we have right now of net zero carbon by 2050, and hearing that the other two large utilities in the state are also looking to how they can set those goals and define those paths for themselves as well.
All right, well, thank you all. We are past time, and I don't want to take up the entire evening of our board members. You know, it occurs to me that one of the drawbacks of a virtual meeting like this is that, one, we can't applaud you for giving us this great information, but obviously, two, we don't get that great happening after a meeting like this where attendees can go up and meet each of you, ask additional questions, have more broad conversation. But I will note that luckily, since we live in a public power state, you know, we all have representatives that we can contact about these questions to learn more about what our own utilities are doing, or to learn more about what LES, NPPD, or OPPD are doing. And I know that each of you have shared contact information for your board. And I will note that I'm happy to share the resources that Lucas mentioned and that Eric mentioned, and any that Mary might want to pass along. to attendees on this call. And I just want to say thank you to all the board members and also thank you to all the attendees.
Lou, you have my contact information. You can add it to any correspondence that goes out if you'd like.
Great.
So as a closing note, remember this is public power, and this is the time when you as customer owners get to decide the direction of public power in the future on November 3rd. Without getting into any details for nonprofit reasons, 3 of the board seats at OPPD are up for election, as well as some at NPPD. And so if you wish to be involved in the future of public power, in less than 100 days, you will have your chance to help shape the future of our state. Thanks, Lou, for helping to organize this, and the others. It's great to talk to you as always.
Thank you.
You bet. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.